We are talking today about our subject of today is apostasy from Islam. This will be part 8. We define the lower and non-negotiable limit of Islam as a commitment to believe in God, the last day and the good deeds, implementing the moral ideals of ethical perfection that were first laid out by Noah and accomplished by Muhammad. Islam is the only religion of humans' natural disposition that Allah has authorized for humankind. It is the religion that does not allow the increase in the number of absolute taboos, but allow new permissible and prohibitions according to what human societies, parliaments, and civil law courts see fit to introduce. It is the religion that most people in this world adhere to at the moment. And yet, apostasy from Islam occurs namely on 3 levels. A, the level of religious doctrine. Apostasy here means to cut oneself off from Allah by disbelieving in His existence and the day of judgment. Apostasy here means heresy, and this includes withdrawing from a monotheistic belief, there is no God but God, and adopting a polytheistic belief. Here, the second Shahada, Muhammad is God's messenger, does not matter at all. Once the base is gone, what's on top of it doesn't matter. As for religious doctrine, a person enjoys absolute freedom. He can freely decide between Islam and heresy. No one should ever force a person to adopt a specific belief or disbelief, because the religious belief of a person does not touch as such the social collective, and everyone should be free to voice his belief in public. B, the level of social and ethical practice. Apostasy here means to renounce the good work and ignore the prescriptions of morality. To transgress the basics of moral law would mean to live a life of flagrant immorality, disrespect of parents, open vandalism, truancy, indecencies, and public calls for more corruption, bribery, exploitation, slander, and defamation. If such a person apostatizes from morality, it is the duty of everyone, regardless of their religious affiliation, to restrain him. The fight against immorality all over the world is the realm where Muslim believers should work hand in hand with the rest of humankind. Unlike the first level of religious doctrine, it is clear that apostasy from morality, and this includes from human rights, cannot be tolerated, since Islam organizes the social relation between different sections of society and beyond. Put differently, an apostasy from Islam which would have disastrous social and moral consequences must be categorically prohibited by the legislator. Hence, the C level of legislation. The C level is apostasy occurs when legislation transgresses the upper and lower limits set by God in the book. Islamic legislation means a civil human legal system that operates within the limits of Allah. The more civilized a society becomes, the closer its law approaches a true legislation of limits, which represent the Hanifiya character of Islam. At the moment, this is best realized in those states that possesses a constitution and a parliamentary system, because the more democratic a society is, the more Hanific it is with respect to its form of legislation. Apostasy from Iman, we have learned that Al-Iman combines the first Shahada, there is no God but God, with the second Shahada, Muhammad is God's messenger. We identify the people who followed Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, and Jesus as Muslim assenters, and the followers of Muhammad as Muslim believers. Some chapters of the book are entirely dedicated to a discussion of issues relating to the Muslim believers, such as Surah Muhammad and Surah Al-Anfal. It follows from here that Judaism and Christianity are like the Ummah of Muslim believers. not religions, but spiritual communities. As we are told by the book, never will the Jews or Christian be satisfied with you unless you follow their social religious community. Milletahum. Ibrahim, Surah Baqarah, verse 120. A Muslim believer who leaves Iman, that is apostatized from following Muhammad in order to become a Christian or Jew, only moves according to our understanding from one monotheistic community to another. He simply ceases to be a Muslim believer, but since he still believes in the Tawheed, God's unity, he is still a Muslim assenter. He's still in Islam. The book states, say, O people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you, that we worship none but God, that we associate no partners with him, that we erect not from among ourselves lords and patrons other than God. If then they turn back, say, bear witness that we at least are Muslims bowing to God's will. Chapter Al-Imran, verse 64. The verse says, O people of the book, because Jews and Christians were addressed like this during the time of the Prophet, it also contains the command term shared by them and Muhammad's followers. Worship none by God, no shirk and no idolatry. That is, they all rejected rububiyyah among themselves. It ends with the admission that if they are not happy about this, they at least should bear witness that he, in example Muhammad, is a prophet, and they, in example his followers, are still Muslim assenters. But why did Muhammad want Jews and Christians to testify that he and his followers are Muslim assenters? Because he believed that Jews and Christians were themselves Muslims, and he saw himself as one of them. Even through later on, he wanted them to join Iman, while he allowed them to keep their faith in Allah's Tawheed. If we looked at Muhammad's mission from a political angle, it is evident that in addition to his role as a messenger who spread the revelation of his Lord, he was also a prophet who, with the support of his followers, was able to erect a centralized state on the Arabian Peninsula with Yathrib, later called renamed Medina, as his capital. His new state included people and tribes from all religious affiliations, including Christians and Jews. Compared to anything that existed before, this was a qualitative jump in the way states were previously formed and administered. It was only natural that the names of the states' new political positions reflected the historic situation. For example, the title Leader of the Muslim Believers, Amir al-Mu'mineen, or Treasury of the Muslim Assenters, Bayt Mal al-Muslimin. While the Amir, Arabic Amir, was the head of state because he led the group of believers who founded the state, hence Amir al-Mu'mineen. The public treasury administrated the money and property of all citizens regardless of their religious affiliation, hence Bayt Mal al-Muslimin, not al-Mu'mineen, Muslimin, assenters. The historical sources tells us that in his capacity as a Khalif, Ali did not hesitate to give money to Jews and Christians from his treasury, Bayt al-Mal. And that after Ali's death, Abu Dhar al-Ghafari opposed the proposal of the new Caliphate Muawiyah to change the name from Treasury of all Muslims to Treasury of God, Bayt Mal Allah. This reflected the widespread opinion that even though the Amir al-Mu'mineen, as head of state, is in possession of all legislative and executive powers administered mostly by his fellow Muslim believers, hence his title as their leader. The public treasury must not be restricted solely to the concerns of Muslim believers, but should also consider the financial needs of Jews and Christians. Many modern states show a similar structure of public administration. We continue on from the last subject. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, for example, has been appointed to lead a government because he represents all the political goals and aspirations of the political party that won the last election, mostly either Labour or Conservatives. Whether the Chancellor of the Exchequer is expected to administer, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, ex, exchequer is expected to administer a budget whose money is spent on all sections of the population, regardless of their political affiliations. Before the introduction of a unified national tax system, Jews and Christians were required to pay the so-called jizya, a head tax on free non-believers who lived under the rule of a Muslim believers. This was seen as an equivalent to the tax, zakat, sadaqat, which the Muslim believers had to pay. The money the public treasury received in this way was spent in roughly equal terms in return on both Muslim believers and Muslim assenters. Today, modern tax law requires the state to collect taxes from all citizens equally, and yet it allows both Muslim believers and Muslim assenters alike to pay voluntary sadaqah to religious and charity organizations. This is money they can spend on the specific needs of their respective religious community. An example for prayer rooms, schools, nurseries, interfaith centers, etc., etc. The modern tax system is hence more dynamic and flexible and has made the old jizya head tax entirely redundant. The call for reintroduction of the jizya tax ignores the fact that the current economic and financial context of our tax systems has changed to such a degree that any specific state tax collected from citizens according to their religion would make no sense whatsoever. It ignores the fact that in fiscal reality, the religious sadaqat are no longer part of the monthly annual state income, and that non-Muslim believers already contributed to state revenues in the form of national income tax, VAT, and other taxes on consumer goods such as petrol and tobacco, etc. To call for a return of the old jizya tax in the modern world is certainly anachronistic, as it is ignorant of the possibility that ancient terms can acquire new meaning when they have lost their old ones. What jizya signifies today is adequately expressed in the general tax laws that modern nation states apply. A return to the old system would create nothing but bloodshed and national disintegration. Seen from a modern perspective, the followers of Muhammad operate on the level of state and government like a political party that was led by the Prophet. Institutionally and ideologically, this represented a dramatic change to the political scene on the Arabian Peninsula, which used to be organized around the principles and values of clan culture and tribal solidarity. Because of their early conversions to the new religion, faith, the group of the Muhajirin and Ansar formed a kind of political avant-garde that also enjoyed more privileges than others in terms of political posts and shares of war booty. It certainly marked a progression to a higher form of political organization, which regrettably was abolished soon after the Prophet died. The fact that Muhammad succeeded in establishing a centralized state led, however, to the unfortunate impression that his prophetical mission essentially included his role as a statesman, and that he was both prophet and king in one person. And yet this is both theologically and historically inaccurate. As shown by Muhammad Sa'id al-Ashmawi's profound analysis in his book Islam C. In the political Arab Muslim mind, we come across two concepts. First, whoever wants to found a state and become its head, thereby emulating the model of Muhammad, needs to be first a prophet. An example, needs to represent his political aspirations in religious terms. Second, whoever wants to seize leadership of the Muslim believers must wait until the founders of the state disappear. Both things have indeed occurred in our history. The prophetical claims of Al-Aswad al-Ansi, Musaylama, Tulayha bin Khuwaylid are examples of the first concept. Being their religious rhetoric was in fact a tactical political tool to undermine the unity of the community and the authority of the state. Religion was propagated in order to pursue political apostasy and to disobey the government. Neither the Prophet nor after his death Abu Bakr could afford to tolerate a political schism. Hence their orders to fight and kill the secessionist apostates. The occurrence of political opportunism after the seizure of Mecca in 630 is a good example of the second concept. After the Meccan opposition to Muhammad, led by Abu Sufyan and Amr ibn al-As, was defeated in 630 when the Prophet seized Mecca, the Prophet's former enemies quickly closed ranks with the Muslim believers and, in order to pursue their old goals in the disguise of the new faith, joined the party of the new religion. However, they had to wait until the first generation, an example, the first rightly guided caliphs, which had established the state, had gone, before Muawiyah could restore the power and privileges of the old Meccan aristocracy in 661, which had lost its influence in politics for some 30 years. Let us repeat that a society cannot afford to tolerate apostasy in the sense of turning away from morality and civility, and must introduce legislation that makes such apostasy punishable. If the apostasy is, however, from a religious creed, society must not interfere because it should tolerate freedom of choice on such personal matters. It should never be punished by death. Only in the cases of political apostasy, whose aim is to undermine the unity of the nation and its territories, as well as the authority of the state and its institution, is the use of force and the shedding of blood justified, such as the Civil War that happened here in the USA. They had to keep the country united. So we continue on. The Secessionist War and the history of the United States are a good example of what we mean by political apostasy. When the states of the South, in detail now we say it, when the states of the South, the separatists, declared their independence in 1860 under the leadership of Jefferson Davis and General Robert E. Lee, and thus treated to undermine the territorial integrity of the USA, their secessionism was fought by the Union Army under Abraham Lincoln in a long and bloody civil war that cost millions of lives. By the end of the conflict, national unity was restored. If any religious community in the United States today, for example, the Christian right, threatened to withdraw from mainstream society in order to establish their own autonomous state, which does not accept the authority of secular state law, the federal government in Washington would immediately respond to such a threat by forcibly suppressing any practical step in that direction. The separation of Syria from Egypt in 1961, after 3 years of a political union from 58 to 61, in the form of the United Arab Republic, was in fact a form of political apostasy. We know that President Nasser was given all the powers, including military force, to stop Syria's secession, but in the end shied away from using force, and consequently the separation took place. Separation can never be accepted except when a nation reclaims territory that has been occupied by a foreign power, Tibet, Palestine, for example, or has been denied territorial sovereignty, as in Kurdistan, Darfur, and on condition that its claim to an independent state are acknowledged by the United Nations and supported by the majority of countries worldwide. Given this political history, it is peculiar to see a revival of Omar's very narrowly defined view on apostates. Had he labeled as apostates those renegade tribes who denied the Medinian central government the right to collect the official zakat tax from them? Those who claim similar things today forget that in spite of their religious pretexts, these tribes were motivated by their ultimate goal of becoming financially and eventually politically independent from central government. They refused to pay zakat not because they had doctrinal quarrels with an alms tax, but rather because they wanted to spend the money on their own region. And yet it was clear that the tribe's refusal would have resulted in their secession from the central state, something which Omar countered through his campaign against apostasy. The term only reflecting the tribe's religious rhetoric. But whatever the political motivations might have been, Omar's definition of apostasy has lost its relevance today, because zakat is no longer collected by the state, but rather voluntarily paid in order to support either charities and welfare organization or the poor relatives of one's own family. As for religious apostasy, it is shocking to notice a new kind of fanaticism among Muslim believers when they accuse one another of apostasy, sometimes only on the ground that someone has missed a prayer or has said something provocative or contradicting main political stream views. People get called apostates only because they dare to challenge the opinion of the scholars who deem themselves to be kind of a thought police who control and censor everything people say and do. Such zealousness has nothing to do with either Iman, with either Islam or Iman. In our eyes, it is an unfortunate return to the medieval Inquisition, where lists of heretics and apostates were circulated during the reign of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur and al-Ma'mun bin al-Rashid. Under the pretext that they must uphold religious orthodoxy for the will of God, they had their political opponents' heads cut off because these people dared to differ on sensitive issues. Under the same pretext today, hundreds of innocent elderly people, women and children are killed simply because they are in the wrong place at the wrong time when a suicide bomber strikes in the name of religious orthodoxy. And still, no one seems to dare a complete revision of the old fiqh concept of apostasy that has imported the ancient values of inquisitionist fanaticism into our current times. Why can we not have, like in France or Canada, the freedom of openly express our religious beliefs or disbeliefs without someone being allowed to harm them, provided that the ethical and social behavior of apostates do not undermine public order and the general norms of moral decency? Why can't people not choose the religious creed they want, in particular if they are born into a community they did not choose themselves? As long as their loyalty to their home nation cannot be questioned, what harm would there be in allowing a Muslim believer to leave Muhammad's community and join the followers of Jesus? Or the opposite, given that the book prohibits compulsion in religion in chapter 2, verse 256, can we force people to stay in a religious community they have not chosen? We are told that if it had been your Lord's will, they would all have believed, all who on earth. Will you then compel mankind against their will to believe? Chapter Yunus, verse 99. People should be permitted to differ in their opinions and practices, as long as they do not undermine the general consensus on human rights and the highest moral ideals the book describes. They should be allowed to apostatize. It is vital that they should enjoy the same rights as those who apostatized during the time of the Prophet. They were left entirely unharmed because Muhammad strictly adhered to the book's prescription of religious tolerance. After the death of the Prophet, his followers became divided into several different political blocs that later turned into different religious sects. This early split in Muhammad's community had initially nothing to do with either the pillars of Islam or Iman, but eventually led to a scholarly revisionism by which the pillars of Iman were given preference over the pillars of Islam. Having learned the lesson from the political schism of Islam Islam's early history, we propose to establish a new basis on which we can strengthen the human universal character of Islam, which overrides all narrow interest of party politics. The truth of Islam does not lie in being capitalist or socialist or in promoting the manifestos of a Labour Party or a Conservative Party. Before anything else, Islam promotes humanity. It does not favor one social class over another, and it does not put the views of medieval fuqaha, ulama, and the companions over anyone else. It does not accept the exclusivist notion of an Arab morality, nor does it believe in the existence of a non-Arab morality. There is only one morality, which is the morality of humanity. What appears as Arab or non-Arab are rather customs and traditions that can be overcome, albeit with difficulty and only over a long period of time. Let us finally come to the frequently discussed clash between traditional and modernity that modernist discourse proposes. For us, it is a clash of two different epistemologies, one based on modern methods of historicism, historical critical research, and dialectical philosophical thinking, and one that is based on medieval terminologies which have come to us as empty signifiers that has lost their meaning. The semantic content of these terms that once fitted nicely into the political historical context in which they were created has become entirely anachronistic in our different modern contexts. Unlike modern epistemologies that have their origin in the study of reality, these traditional epistemologies avoid reality by remaining in a past that disappeared a long time ago. This is the terminology of fiqh, kalam, tafsir, and hadith. Until here, we finished, and we will continue on with prescribe right and proscribe wrong is next.